Feel free to send us questions through the chat. Feel free to send us questions privately during the session. I'd actually recommend that you send your chat questions privately to me, if that's okay. And I'm just going to send a message to that effect. So, of course, you can send questions to us publicly if you'd like. But I'm just adding this. So, but you have a question that you'd just rather have it come directly to one of us, feel free to send it to me. I'll be in the background for a fair amount of the presentation today. So anyway, so if you want to send public questions or private questions to me, that's all fine. Just a couple of other things to mention. We will have a fourth colleague be joining us later on too, and he'll also, his name is Matthew, he'll be able to be here for the question period also. So anyway, we are about a minute past the hour, so I think that we should introduce ourselves first, and then we can dive right into the presentation. And again, where this is a presentation about graduate school, and this is also a presentation that's leading up to a workshop that's coming up. It's tomorrow, right, Liliana? I'm forgetting when it is now.
Hello, sorry about that. My computer just froze. So I'll share my screen again.
Liliana might not be here anyway. We'll confirm on that point as we move along today. In any case, though, we're here today, and I'll just introduce myself quickly and then pass things to my colleagues to introduce themselves. So my name is Jared Secord. I work at the Student Success Center at the university, and my job title this coordinator for scholars programming. So I coordinate programming primarily for, oh, there's Liliana. Okay, yep, I coordinate programming for a program primarily for undergraduate students, but I provide a lot of advising to students who are interested in graduate school. And my background is I'm a former faculty member. I used to teach history courses at universities in the United States. So I do draw from experience as a faculty member and as someone who bluntly spent a lot of time in graduate school in my earlier days. I'm just going to throw things to my colleague Paul to introduce himself.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul, and I also work as an academic development specialist at the Student Success Center, and my niche, I guess, is grad students. I work with a lot of grad students on mock defenses, providing writing support for them on their dissertations. I also spent far too long in graduate school and have taught at the university level. I was a sessional instructor for a few years at U of C, and then migrated into this position. Yeah, I look forward to the presentation. Liliana, would you like to take it away?
Yeah, hello everyone. My name is Liliana Gonzalez. I am a career specialist at Career Services, and I've been working at the university for the past 13 years in a variety of roles, supporting students from all different faculties. And I've recently just completed my Master's of Counseling Psychology through the University of Calgary. So I'll be happy to also share some of my recent experiences as a graduate student at the UC.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Paul, Liliana. So I'll just introduce the workshop right now, and then we'll pass things back and forth between the three of us for different sections of things. And it's occurring to me, I'm going to turn the live transcript on, or I'm going to ask Liliana to turn the live transcript on just for accessibility. So perhaps Liliana, you can click yes on that. Basically, and we can have that going. Okay, so people should be able this live transcript then of when we're talking. Okay, so just to tell you what we're doing today then for our agenda. So we are going to spend some time thinking a little bit about what your motivations might be for considering graduate school and why people do want to go to graduate school. We'll talk about some skills that can help you succeed as a graduate student. And we'll also talk a little bit about how you can make choices between different types of graduate programs, different universities potentially, and what sort of steps you should take in terms of gathering information. And we'll all how to try to make a strong graduate school application. And as I said, we'll have lots of time to field questions from all of you, and we can talk about additional ways that you can try to seek out support from us at the university if you are considering graduate school. So I'm going to pass things to Liliana now, who's going to do the next section of the slides then. So thanks, Liliana.
Yeah, and so one of the main questions students typically have is why should I go into grad school? And that might be one of the questions that you have, and perhaps why you're here. And this is something to consider quite a bit in terms of before applying to grad school, before engaging in this process. And so there are a number of questions that you could ask yourself. And one of them would be, what is your ultimate goal in terms of career? So sometimes people have an idea, let's say, of a specific profession or occupation that requires a very specific degree. So in those cases, let's say, for example, a professional program like psychology or social work, nursing, and you might have a very linear pathway. You know, in order to get to a specific occupation, you have to take certain school. There are other times, though, in which, let's say, you're just very interested in a topic, or let's say there's an opportunity that has come up. And so there could be a variety of reasons for you to consider grad school. What I would recommend for you to do is try to think about the career goal and think about, would attending graduate school really help with my long-term career goal? And a crucial piece of this is being able to connect with people that have potentially taken that program, similar type of educational programs, and really ask questions about what it's like. Because sometimes students have assumptions of, let's say, in order to get into a specific career, that they need to have training in a specific area. So it is important just for you to check your assumptions and see if they're accurate. One of the biggest myths that we get sometimes is that you want to get a graduate program just to find a job. So if it's just to find a job, it might not be a great reason for taking up school. You might want to have other reasons for taking up graduate school. You also want to consider potential challenges. And so we do know that there's certain strengths and skills that you're going to need in order to be successful. And that's something that we are going to be talking about throughout the workshop. But you want to consider what are the pros and cons of considering grad school. I will be going over some of those just shortly here. And also consider your strengths. So in terms of what are you good at? What comes naturally to you? And is there a program that will match your skills and strengths? That way you're more likely to succeed in that program. And finally, do I have adequate support? So that includes not just, let's say, financial support, emotional support, but also even when you're choosing a program, when you're choosing an institution, really realizing what are some of the supports available to you when you are a graduate student. So for example, within the University of Calgary, we have different types of departments that can help you throughout your studies, like the student success and many others. And so it's a good idea to also think about how you're going to be supported through this journey. So here are some of the potential gains and cons. So when you are considering grad school, we have some examples here, but do you know that every single person is going to have their unique gains and costs? So it's not the same for everyone. So this is something you do want to consider. You might want to write it down. And so we do know some of the potential gains. According to some research and depending on the industry, you do have greater earning potential. So what that means is that according to a lot of different salary studies, they've shown that around after 5 years of working in industry or working as a professional, you tend to have higher earning potential, sometimes 5% more than someone that might not have a graduate degree. So that could be one of the gains. You're definitely going to develop expertise in a particular area. And so that can expand your career opportunities. And so that's why it's so important that you really follow your passion, because you're going to be specializing in a topic that you're probably going to be using through your career. So thinking about which topic is going to be useful for you. It's also going to provide the opportunity to sometimes change career directions. So if you have a bachelor's degree in an area that perhaps you're not sure if you want to pursue a career in that particular area, you can also think about completing a master's degree or a PhD that can change, sometimes 360-degree change into a different career path. So this could be an option for you to also transition into a different career. It also includes higher prestige, and so we know that sometimes having this can be very prestigious, that you're able to have a graduate degree, and when you're applying for jobs, you'll be able to use this and showcase different types of skill sets that you can bring as a graduate student. And then sometimes we do hear that students don't know quite yet what to do. Maybe they have not found their passion. Potentially they have not figured out what to do after they graduate from bachelor's programs. So they decide to complete a master's degree, which is not always 100% what we encourage you to do. We would encourage you to find a goal and then pursue that. But it is the case sometimes that students decide to take it and then see where it leads them after they graduate. Now, equally, we have a number of costs that might be found if you complete a graduate program. We do know that there is a cost, financial cost, and it really depends on how long the program is, the institution. So you're gonna have to consider that. Sometimes too, if let's say you are already working, you are a professional, maybe you have full-time work, you might have to consider potentially not working while you're in graduate programs. However, there are some graduate programs that allow you to work full-time as well. So from personal experience, while I was completing my Master's of Counseling program, I was able to work full-time because it was an online program. So you're gonna see there's tons of different opportunities for you to explore. One of the drawbacks could be, especially if the industry or the career you're wanting to go towards does not require a master's or a PhD, is that when you start applying for jobs, if you are not able to write how it's transferable to a specific field, you could become overqualified. But that is something that if, let's say, you ever had questions, you can kind of look at your resume, the way you portray your skills. So that could be a drawback if you are not able to show how your degrees are transferable to a specific job. Other things too, we know some graduate students have mentioned it could be a bit stressful. You are going to have tight deadlines. Sometimes you have to be able to work independently. And so it could cause for you to have different commitments. So that's something else that you are going to have to think about. And I'm going to pass it on to Paul. He's going to talk to us about the skills that you're going to need in order to succeed in graduate school.
Okay, thanks, Liliana. I don't have control of the slides, I don't believe, so, or do I? No, I don't. Okay, so as Liliana was mentioning, one major reason why students go into graduate school is because they are interested in a certain career. And, that's great. That's a great reason to go into graduate school. However, graduate school is not simply, as you can imagine, a straightforward stepping stone to a career. I mean, you have to ask yourself whether you have the, first of all, the enthusiasm and the interest in what you're going to be studying for, potentially 2 or more years if you're doing a PhD. You obviously have to have a strong commitment to research. So if you are going into a research-based thesis or PhD, a research-based master's or PhD, you're going to be immersed in that research. And if you don't love doing research, you're going to find graduate school very challenging, maybe dry. Thirdly, if you thought that undergraduate work was extremely challenging in terms of a new level of autonomy, that's especially the case in graduate school. I mean, you do spend a lot of time on your own in graduate school. You have to be very self-disciplined. So, be aware of that going in. And you also will experience, no doubt, as I think we all have, I certainly did, a pretty profound learning curve when you get into graduate school. It can be a little bit hard on your self-esteem for a while. And so you really have to have a growth mindset, meaning you can't simply conclude after a few months that I don't belong here, I don't have what it takes, it's highly likely that, what's happening for you is that you're having to adapt to a new set of expectations, new set of conditions. And, that's what we call a growth mindset. It's a recognition that, okay, I may not be, I may not have everything I need right now to do my graduate degree, but I can learn it, I can adapt, I can implement new strategies. Another thing you have to be prepared for is obstacles. There is nothing straightforward about a graduate degree. You're going to come up against a few obstacles, including potentially, problems with your supervisor. And so you really have to have that perseverance and patience to see it through. In my own degree, I came close a couple of times to just walking away from it all, and I just kind of pushed through. That is normal. And so just to sum up, grad school is not just an easy stepping stone to a career. You've got to not just focus on the career, but you've got to focus on what you're going to have to accomplish in graduate school to get there. Next slide, please, Liliana. So there are many skills that are, a good idea to develop in grad school, but here are three categories of skills that I would recommend you focus on, preferably in advance so that you're not learning on the fly. So if you haven't done a whole lot of research at the undergraduate level and you're not intimately familiar with all the university's, research resources like databases, etc., it's a good idea to become acquainted with them, especially the databases that are most, relevant to your field. You want to be aware of the top ranking journals in your discipline because you don't want to be reading, fairly marginal research from not very well known journals. You want to be at the cutting edge of your discipline. You want to be citing sources that are well respected in your field. And you also want to familiarize yourself, if you haven't already, with reference management softwares such as EndNote or Mendeley, because, again, going from undergrad to grad is kind of like going from, I suppose, to use a sports analogy, from the minor leagues to the major leagues. And so, the scrutiny, not to scare you or anything, but there will be more scrutiny on your writing, and specifically on any potential plagiarism that you may unintentionally be guilty of. And a reference management software can help to reduce the risk of plagiarism by keeping all your citations carefully documented, etc. And you can consult with a subject librarian. There are a number of librarians who who basically specialize in different disciplines. So if you're not sure about what the top ranking journals in your discipline are, or what databases you should be using, you can make an appointment with them through the library website. Next slide, please, Liliana. Okay, one of the, as I mentioned at the outset, I do work a lot with graduate students and on a fairly long-term basis. So I will support them through their dissertation often. And one of the things that I have concluded over the years is that supervisors generally do not have the time, or perhaps not even the ability to articulate in an explicit way some of the expectations of a dissertation. So there are certain rhetorical conventions, for instance, that students, are not familiar with. The idea that you need to clearly identify your research problem in the introduction, for instance, but not only that, you have to talk about the importance of your research problem. You have to talk about, briefly in the introduction about what other people have said about your research problem, how they've tried to solve it. You have to identify the research gap. So there are all these sort of rhetorical expectations beyond the necessities of logic that you have to be familiar with. And obviously, there are also different types of genres of writing. So there's not just the dissertation or the thesis. Sometimes you're asked to write, most often you're asked to write a research proposal, which has its own sort of structure, an annotated bibliography, etc. So, it's important that you familiarize yourself with those things. You may not get all the support you need from your supervisor in that respect. So take advantage of the writing support that we offer through the Student Success Center. You can get one-on-one writing support. You can also go to workshops, grad writing workshops, and we also have other supports like the grad writing community, which I'll leave it up to you to familiarize yourself with that. Just a final point about writing skills: you need to learn to use sources effectively and with integrity. That brings us back to the question of plagiarism. So, you have to know how to paraphrase without plagiarizing. If your paraphrase is too close to the original, you can actually be accused of plagiarism, even if you cite your source. So there are all kinds of little things like that that you need to learn. Can we see the next slide, Liliana? Okay, supervisor relations. If I had to choose one thing that I see over and over again, working with graduate students, it's conflicts with supervisors. They can be low-level conflicts, they can be, higher level conflicts. But a lot of those conflicts can be avoided by, in the early days. When you meet with a supervisor, you need to learn how to set expectations together. You have to figure out what, your supervisor's supervisory style is. If you need a lot of support, if you need a great deal of instruction, you need a supervisor who's going to do that for you. Some supervisors are very hands-off, and that can cause a lot of conflict, obviously, when expectations are completely opposed. You also want to learn how to process and integrate the feedback from your supervisor, and that means not taking it personally, being able to handle critical feedback, and all those aspects of supervisor relations we can help you with at the Student Success Center. I and Jared and our colleagues who are also academic development specialists can sit down with you and talk about any potential issues you're having. But that's something to think about in advance, especially when you're approaching a supervisor. You want to know how to approach them. You want to have the conversations going to make your expectations, your respective expectations, clear to avoid future conflict. Next slide, please, Liliana. So one of the things that comes up for international students, especially, there are cultural differences between undergrad and grad. There are cultural differences between, high school and university in that sense of culture, in that broad sense of culture. But of course, there are also potential misunderstandings that crop up as a result of cultural difference. So international students will sometimes come from a culture where requests are very indirect. You don't ask directly for something, and so students will sometimes make requests and their supervisor, who does not share their cultural assumptions, will not recognize it as a request, and the student, can feel frustrated. Again, if you are used to a lot of direction, and your supervisor is someone who, for partly for cultural reasons, is very kind of hands-off in their supervisory style, that can also create cultural misunderstandings. A lot of supervisors will be very informal. I remember supervisors in grad school saying, call me, by my first name, and I kind of struggled with that for a while. I felt that's somehow not appropriate, and so you're going to have to kind of negotiate these cultural assumptions. You may not share the same cultural assumptions as your professor. It's good just to be aware that those differences in assumptions exist, and you need to sort of have a clear conversation about these issues, and recognize them when they come up. Okay, I think we're back to, is this you, Liliana, or Jared?
This is me now, Paul. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are just moving to the next section right now, which is how to select the right program for you. So I'll just talk about this for the next couple minutes, and then I'll pass things back to Liliana for the next section. So how to select the right program. So right away, and some of you, I suspect, already know exactly what you want to do, or you have pretty specific ideas. And so I'll just mention some of these considerations. This is more for if you're still in that position of saying, I might be interested in graduate school, but you're not totally sure what you're going to graduate school for or why it might make sense, things like this. So midpoint right away is to think about the distinction between a course-based or a thesis-based program. Another way of saying that is a course-based will just be, as the name implies, you'll be taking courses. If it's a thesis-based program, you'll be doing research. So if your longer term goal, for instance, is you'd like to do a PhD, maybe you'd like to work for a university as an instructor or a professor in some capacity, you'll want to be going in a pathway that will involve. So you'll want to be thinking about a thesis-based program rather than a course-based program. If you're thinking about a course-based program, you might have very specific goals in mind in terms of things like employment in general then, but that normally will not be a pathway for you if you want to teach at a university one day. Some other things to think about, the requirements for different programs will vary immensely, and that's all that I can really say on that. You'll need to look at different programs, their websites to see what they have to say, and you'll need to see, do I meet these requirements? One thing that I will just say as a general point, for those of you who might be finishing up your undergraduate studies right now, or may still be undergraduate students, if you'd like to do research in graduate school, it's good to have done research already as an undergraduate student, whether this means working in the summer as a research assistant, whether this in an honors degree where you're going to be doing an honors thesis. You'll find that some programs will say, we want people who've already done an honors thesis. We want someone who's done an honors project, that type of thing. So just keep that that thing in mind if you're thinking about the research pathway. Other things to consider, a course-based program, you'll normally be paying for yourself. You won't have funding options for that. Many research programs, especially in Canada, you can receive funding from the university, and we'll talk more about this as we move along. Other things just to consider are just what sort of support do you think will be available to you from the particular program? And that will really vary, and it'll vary in part on the size of the program, how long it will take, things like this, and people's experiences will substantially differ sometimes. And the last point, if you are thinking about doing research, you'll want to make sure that you've got somebody that you can work with effectively. So a potential supervisor who you can work with. And this one's hard. Sometimes there won't be a good fit with a potential supervisor. Also, bluntly, I hope that this is less and less the case, but it still does happen. There will be some supervisors who, well, you'll hear unofficially in some fields, people will say, don't go and work with that person. That person has married 3 of his graduate students before, things like this, that type of thing. So you will want to think to try to see what information you can gather about that. That's information that you'll most likely be trying to gather unofficially by talking to other people in the field, trying to find this sort of thing out. Unfortunately, there still are people who are sexual abusers, people who sexually harass their students. And again, sometimes if you're in the finding this information out. So I would just encourage some caution on that point. I'm not trying to be negative here. I want to be pragmatic, and I also want to be realistic to say that there are issues like this in graduate school still, unfortunately. Just moving ahead to the next slide here. So when we're thinking about, again, the thesis-based versus the course-based, Liliana, if you can move us to the next slide, please. Thank you. That go through, or I know there are Zoom issues sometimes. Yeah, me too.
Still the same slide, Liliana.
Sorry, you're muted, Liliana, so I can't hear what you just said.
It's frozen.
Oh, it's frozen for you. Okay.
Can you share it?
Sure. Yeah, just a second. I know that this has been happening to me with Zoom a little bit right now. So anyway, pardon me while I just get this shared. Sorry, there are too many things on my screen right now. So I'm just going to start sharing, and then I can drive for the next little bit. So can people see that, Paul? You can see, Liliana?
No, not yet. No.
Okay.
There we go.
It's coming through now? Okay.
Yeah.
So just looking at this and thinking about this then for a thesis-based versus course-based, I did talk about this a little bit already. So some things to keep in mind about this. So for a thesis-based, my computer's also doing some things to me now, but in any case, if you're doing a thesis-based, this is if you'd like to do research. This is often the pathway if you'd like to go on or continue to do a PhD. You a common sort of pattern is you may have you may take courses for 1 year, a few courses, and then in your second year you'll write and defend a thesis. And again, this is the PhD pathway. This is something that is typically, let's say 2 years. It can take a little bit more, and funding is more commonly available in this route. For a course-based program, this might be 1 year, could be 2 years, but you'll often you'll be taking some courses. You might do maybe a capstone project or a research project at some stage, but it really depends. And this tends to be more of a fit for people who are saying, if I get this degree, you can maybe get a higher salary at work. You can maybe be eligible jobs, and again, 2 years is fairly common for this. And as Liliana mentioned before, these might be a program, or these might be something that you can complete while working. Sorry, things are echoing a little bit too, so I apologize if that sound is also apparent to some other of you. But anyway, let's just keep going with this and just thinking about, again, minimum requirements. So if you're thinking about going to graduate school, what do you need in order to do this? So it is pretty common, and pretty much everywhere you'll see that they want you to have a 4-year undergraduate degree and at least a 3.0 GPA. Honestly, it can be a bit higher than that, though. You'll see some programs that'll say you need to have at least a 3.4 GPA, and realistically, you might need a higher GPA than that. I'd say if you have really detailed questions on this, follow up with the institution, the program, to see what they can tell you. If you are not a native speaker of English, or if you do not have a degree from a university in an English-speaking country, and again, the requirements will really vary on this. You may need to demonstrate English language proficiency. Honestly, when I did my PhD in the United States, one program that I applied to there actually wanted me to complete an English language proficiency exam because I wasn't from the United States. So in general, though, I don't think that you'll have to do that, but it just depends on the different requirements for different programs then. So those are just things to think about and to say there. I think that Liliana is, oh no, she'll be back in a minute then. But yeah, financial considerations, and let me just talk about all of this. Up there's Liliana on a different on a different device. Okay, that makes sense. So some things to think about then for the financial considerations. So again, for a course-based program, it'll be pretty similar to undergraduate. You'll have tuition. You'll pay by the number of courses that you're taking. There may be a specific fee associated with the program. Look at the program website for details. If you are moving into a research-based program, it is quite likely in a lot of cases that you can receive funding from the university. From my perspective, once you're a graduate student in a research program, you're basically an employee of the university. The university won't say that, but effectively you are. You're doing work for them. You're doing research. You might be a teaching assistant, and you will and you should get paid for that work, basically. Your supervisor may have funding available because they may have a research grant. And so again, once you become a graduate student in a research program, in most cases, you should have funding. And if you don't get funding, in most cases, I'd recommend don't go to that program, basically. That's my general sort of rule. So these are things just to think about then for many students in graduate school, especially if you're in Canada. And I'm just going to turn my highlighter on. Again, you should be thinking about supervisor funding. You should be thinking about awards or scholarships of some sort. We could go into this in a lot more detail, but I'm just going to put a few acronyms into the chat. And these are institutions that can fund you that exist in Canada. And they stand for Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, Canadian Institute for Health Research, and Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. And so depending on which field you're in, these might be relevant for you. And these are words and acronyms, if you don't know them already, to try to become familiar with for your field. If you want to do research, these will be quite relevant for you. And these will be things that universities will want you to apply for, basically. Anyway, you may also have an opportunity to be a research assistant. You can be a teaching assistant. The student loans avenue, that's especially relevant for you if you're thinking about a course-based program. And part-time employment reality, sometimes for graduate students, sometimes you can get hired by somebody at the university to be a research assistant, that sort of thing. And then the last thing to think about is how long will the program actually take you? So keep that part of thing in mind. My master's degree took 2 years, my PhD took 6 years. And the good news from my perspective was I was funded for all of that time. It wasn't especially generous funding all the time, but it was enough for me to live on. So those are things to be thinking about. I am going to turn things back to Liliana now to go over the next couple sections. It looks like you might be on your phone now,
Yes.
But yep, okay.
Hello.
You're all
I've been
set.
having some technical difficulties, but hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of the graduate school fair, so we're going to have a graduate school fair happening next Thursday, and you can register on the same place where you register for this particular webinar. So if you go to elevate.ucalgary.ca, you can go there. And who is going to be attending? We are going to have a number of prospective students and school recruiters. So you're going to have a number of institutions that are going to come up, and the idea is they're going to be there to provide you with information of their programs and also the different types of the opportunities that are available to you. So what is the purpose of this career school fair? If you can click on the next one, Jared. Awesome. So the Educational Institute's purpose really is to identify students or professionals and to try to find the best fit for their programs. So they are going to have a number of different programs available to them. And so they're going to be promoting not only their institutions, but they're also going to be showcasing the different types of educational roads that you can take. Now, some of them are going to be course-based, some of them are going to be thesis-based, and as Jerry mentioned, there's tons of different opportunities in terms of requirements, the length of program. So in terms of the purpose for you attending, if you go next, we have different purposes. So one of them is going to be to network. And you are going to be able to ask a variety of questions directly to people who are part of these institutions. You are going to collect information and you're going to try to find what the best fit is for you. So if we go to the next slide, we will be going over how to identify which questions you're going to ask. So the first thing I want you to think about is, what do you want to achieve at the career fair? So being part of this webinar, what are some of the questions that are coming through your mind? Are you wondering about finances? Are you wondering about supports? Maybe you're wondering of the program. So by first thinking about what is the purpose of you attending the fair, then that's going to help you. Something else that can really help you out is try to understand yourself too. So think about, what are some of your values? What is important to you? So for example, let's say you really value learning or challenging opportunities. Maybe the types of questions that you ask relate to what are the learning opportunities for you in that program. Maybe you know specific interests that you have. So the types of questions you might ask relate to programs that align to your interests, or the types of research programs or thesis programs that would relate to that interest. Also, think about your strengths and skills. We've been talking quite a bit about that. So are you more of a hands-on learner? Would you prefer perhaps having laboratory experience? Or are you more of the type that loves to read theories and maybe write? So it really depends on your skills and strengths, the types of opportunities that you pursue. And then finally, thinking about your personality traits and attitudes. So personality traits, are you more of an independent person, or perhaps you prefer more of like group type of work? So all of those are going to have an impact on what is going to be considered the right program for you. If we go next. Awesome. Okay, so something that I do want to point out is that when you try to attend these events and when you start considering grad school, I know it happened for me. I had so many different options that at first it could be a bit overwhelming. Like when I was considering grad school, I remember looking up a variety of things. I was looking at counseling, architecture, veterinary. There are tons of different routes that I was looking at. And there might be more than one option that is maybe the right fit for you. So you do want to consider also, what are the opportunities that are becoming available? Perhaps there is funding available, or you're able to connect with a supervisor. So sometimes that can dictate the type of opportunity you end up pursuing. Next. Okay, so based on what you want to achieve, do we have any questions that you want to ask? So maybe if you put it in the chat, any questions you could ask in a career fair based on what you want to learn about or based on your purpose. Do we have any ideas of questions we could ask? And you're welcome to use the chat, or you could also use your mic if that works for you. So could you elaborate? Okay, so yeah, on funding, perfect. Different opportunities, yeah, educational opportunities. Any other ideas of questions you could ask at the career fair if you're talking to educational institutions? How can we know which professors are looking for a graduate? A great question. Jared, Paul, would you like to step in this one?
Sure. Oh, go ahead, Jared, if you want to go.
Oh, yeah. Well, I just, part of me is wondering right now if we're saving on these questions for later, or, but I can answer quickly.
Yeah, maybe just quickly, and then we can go more in depth later.
Yeah, so some programs will have a website where they'll actually say, you know, this professor is looking for graduate students right now, and they'll actually have people divided up in that sort of way. In general, though, you probably need to contact the institution to figure out which people might be taking on graduate students. If someone's going to retire in 2 years, they might not want new graduate students, that sort of thing. So that's a general consideration.
Yeah, and that is a great question.
May be full up.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, or they may be full up. They may have as many students as they can possibly handle, and they're not looking for any more.
But this is also an excellent question you can ask during the career fair when you are talking to someone or representative of the institution. You might ask, how do I know which professors are looking? And every different institution might have different websites, or they might have different contacts as to how you can connect with those professors. Other questions that you could ask, yes, what types of academic support or resources are available? That's great questions. Now, other questions that are coming up, we're going to save for the end. So we'll do that. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. So here are other questions that you could ask here. Now, these are just to give you an idea of questions you could ask. You could definitely target it and apply differently depending on the conversation you're having, depending on the professional you are connecting with. But some of the questions that you could ask could be, why should I apply to the university or your professional program? What are some of the advantages of applying for your program? Other types of questions. Let's say if you wanted to do course-based, you could ask about the classes. What are they like? How big the classes are. That could be another way to kind of figure out if it is a good fit for you. Admission requirements to programs of interest. Those are great because, as Jared mentioned, they really vary greatly depending on the institution and the program. And they might just be able to refer you to a specific page or give you a handout that relates to the ones that you are interested in. And then another question you could ask, what are some of the careers that people usually get into based on, let's say, the field or based on completing a program with your institution? So depending on what your career goal is, if let's say you wanted to work for industry versus maybe you want to work for academia, you could ask those types of questions. Sometimes they have statistics as to where their students or their graduates are after completing the school. And we will be providing a copy of the slides, so you'll be able to have a copy of this if you register on Elevate. Okay, so we can go to the next slide. All right, so based on your purpose, based on being able to see who's coming, we do have a list available on our website. I will send it to you along with the slides so that you can see all the institutions that are coming. What I would recommend is create a list of the institutions you want to talk to. So approximately 10, or really depends on how many you might want to talk to. And even if you have already chosen one particular institution, it might be a good idea to still have others that you can talk to so that you can kind of compare and see the different types of programs that are available. Next. All right, so I want you to be as strategic as possible. Try to pick things related to your area of interest. And again, some that might not be necessarily so related. You might be surprised to find out about programs that maybe you never thought existed. So as I said, for example, for myself, I didn't even realize I could complete a master's program while working full time. And so you might find that there are very specific programs that are going to fit your needs. Also, try to think about small and large educational institutes. And so you could also kind of compare the supports available and which one's going to be a better fit for you. Next one. Now, after you do attend the graduate school fair, you're probably going to have a lot of different information. What I would recommend for you is to reflect on what you learned. So if you want to write it down as you're talking to them, maybe journal, take notes, and try to think about what are going to be your next steps. So the information that you do get at the career fair shouldn't be all the information that you take to make a decision. Maybe you're going to complement it conducting online searches. Maybe you're going to meet with a career specialist if you have access to meeting with a career specialist. And maybe you're going to talk to someone that has graduated in the program and set up an informational interview where you get to ask them about their experience. Potentially, maybe you connect with different supervisors, potential supervisors, professors, and you ask questions about the research. So there are other things you could do after that career fair. Now, one takeaway from each conversation, try to at least have one takeaway. And if there are any other topics or areas of interest, I would say before you apply to grad school, you really want to make sure that the area you're going to be specializing in is the area you want to specialize in for the next couple of years. So if there are any topics that spark your interest, maybe topics that you did not consider in the past, see if there's any programs that perhaps combine that topic with the one that you were initially thinking about. There are tons of different possibilities. There might be possibilities to connect a variety of topics, or sometimes you could do multidisciplinary research. So that could be something else that you can think about. And finally, who would you like to connect with after the fair? Sometimes if there are a lot of people in the fair, you're only able to talk to someone for a short amount of time. And so you might be able to get their contact information, and then you can follow up with them and connect with them after the career fair as well.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about how to create a strong graduate school application, which also often involves identifying potential supervisors. Okay. So certainly one thing that you want ideally to do is to start building a network of connections. You know, you might be able to do that through the grad fair, for instance. If you have attended or are going to be attending conferences at the undergraduate level, sometimes you can make connections there. If you're talking about connections within the university, you know, you might be in a class where you know, the class is small enough that you can actually have some sort of connection to the professor. The professor will know you. Some students at the undergraduate level do summer research, and that, you know, in that way they connect with the professor at the university. But ultimately, you will have to get in touch with the people in the specific program that you'll be applying for. You may not have connections to those people, so you know, sometimes you can use your network. Sometimes you're doing a bit of you know, cold calling, just reaching out, which is fine. For research programs, you normally have to find a supervisor at some point, but the program description will specify whether or not you need to find a supervisor at the very beginning, in which case your admission will be conditional upon finding a supervisor who can vouch for you and who agrees to take you on. In other programs, you'll only have to find a supervisor, you know, maybe a year in. So, you know, make sure you know which is the case in the program that you're looking at. Either way, though, you need to, in your application, you need to have a potential supervisor in mind. You may not have to get the supervisor on board right away, but you have to convince the admissions officer that you know, there is someone or more than one person in the department, in the program, that might be a good fit for you. Next one, please. Okay, so normally, I mean, every graduate application is a little bit different, but typically you will be asked for a personal statement or letter of intent. And that's basically, you know, what got you interested in this field? Why do you want to be a part of our specific program? What are you intending on doing with this degree afterwards for your career? So that would be the personal statement. Sometimes they'll ask for an actual research proposal, i.e. what you intend to, what research project you intend to pursue once you get accepted. So they might even ask you for a fairly elaborate description of your research, along with methodologies, etc. They normally ask for a CV, transcripts, Letters of recommendation, so references from professors that you know, and normally you want to go with references from professors. As hard as sessional instructors work and as competent as they are, they unfortunately do not have as much status in the academy as a professor, and so their reference letters will not carry as much weight. You often also have to prove proficiency in English. If you've already completed a degree at a university, you know, an undergraduate degree in English at a university, you know, you probably won't have to provide that, but it depends on the situation. A sessional instructor, just to answer that question, not only doesn't have tenure, but is not even on the tenure track. In other words, you could work as a sessional instructor for 100 years, and as a sessional instructor, you will never be offered tenure. You have to get into what's called a tenure track position. And then after several years, you're evaluated by your colleagues, and they decide whether or not to give you tenure based on how much research you've done, you know, how well you get along with everyone, et cetera. Yeah. Next slide, Liliana. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, Jared and I work at the Student Success Center, and we do offer regular workshops on some of these components of the application. So personal statements, CVs, and reference letters. You can also meet with a writing support person or with one of us, an academic development specialist, to get feedback on some of these things as well. And I believe that's an old link. It should be Elevate now, probably, right, Liliana? Yeah,
yes,
so
that's correct.
Go to the Elevate site, and you can access the schedule and book a workshop. Next slide, please. Okay, so you know, as I mentioned, you know, if you're applying to a university outside of U of C, chances are you're not going to know the professors you're contacting, but that just puts the onus on you to be very informative in your email to that professor. You want to, first of all, find out whether they're actually taking graduate students, obviously. And as Jared mentioned, some universities do have very handy graduate program descriptions that include information like who is accepting students. In fact, I don't know if you've ever looked at the Explore U of C graduate program site, but they actually have 3 categories of potential supervisors. Well, I guess one of the categories is not really potential supervisor. One of them say one category is, you know, not taking students. One is actively seeking students. So those are the ones that really want some new students. And then there's a third category that is accepting in inquiries. So that means, you know, if your research is interesting enough, they might take you on, but they're not, you know, they're not desperate for students. As I mentioned earlier, it's really important to have a very clear conversation with a potential supervisor about their supervisory style and what you need as a student. So if you need a lot of hands-on support, then you want to find out, you want to ask the professor if, you know, if they provide that kind of support or if they give their students a lot of autonomy. I mean, I've heard many stories from students, especially in the sciences, who say, well, you know, my supervisor basically opened the door to the lab, you know, invited me in, and then I basically had to find my way around myself, you know, so that involves asking other people in the lab, postdocs, et cetera, who don't always have the time to explain everything to you. So it's good if you need that kind of support. It's good to find a supervisor who's willing to give it. You want to, I mean, related to that is how often they meet with students. So is it, once every 6 months, or is it once a week? And also how many students they have. You get these superstar professors sometimes in programs that everyone wants to work with. And so they have, 10 or more students, but obviously they don't have a lot of time for each of those students. So if you're someone who wants and needs a fair bit of support from your supervisor, you might want to look at one of the professors who, who's not a superstar maybe, but who has fewer students and can actually spend more time with you. And as Jared mentioned, you want to connect with current or past graduate students to find out what it was like, because obviously, your supervisor is going to, potential supervisor is going to give the best account possible of themselves, likely. So in order to find out maybe some of the challenges of working with that supervisor, it's good to talk to his or her graduate students, especially I would guess past graduate students, because current graduate students might be a little skittish about potentially criticizing their supervisor. Could have, they might worry that it could have implications. Okay, next slide, please. So you definitely want to be formal in your outreach email to a potential supervisor. You don't want to, use salutations like, hey, that's not going to go over well. As I mentioned, the supervisor, this potential supervisor, especially if they're at another institution, may not know anything about you. And so you need to attach your CV and transcripts, and also explain your interest, because if you just contact a potential supervisor and say, I'm really interested in, your program, period, that's not going to convince the supervisor that you are a good candidate, because if you don't have a clear idea of the field of research you want to work in, if you give the impression that you haven't read the potential supervisor's work, that you know very little about their research field, the supervisor is going to conclude that you haven't done your homework, that you're just kind of taking a shotgun approach and contacting as many potential supervisors as you can. So find out about what your potential supervisor is doing research on. Actually read an article or two so that you can reference the article in your email. Connect their research to your own research interests. You also want to highlight any research experience that you've had, and I guess leadership experience as well. And you also want to request in a diplomatic way, really, suggest the possibility of further discussion, maybe online through a Zoom meeting. You definitely, for the reasons mentioned above, you definitely do not want to write one general statement that you send out to all your potential supervisors, because that's not going to be specific enough. It's not going to show them that you've really thought about how good a fit you would be. And then be brief. Say what you need to say, but don't go on for pages and pages. Next slide, please, Lillian. So here's an example of a letter, and you'll see that there are a couple of components. So, who I am, where I'm at in my education. So I'm completing my 4th year in undergraduate students in whatever discipline, and you're planning to attend graduate school. As I mentioned, a reference to the potential supervisor's research is really important. So your research in the area of whatever is very interesting to me. In particular, I read your paper on whatever and found the implications of it quite fascinating. I would love to conduct research in this area, and I'm wondering if you're accepting new graduate students. So there's the incorporation of that important question. normally, you would find out in advance of actually taking the trouble of writing to them, find out in advance whether they're actually accepting new graduate students. If so, would it be possible to speak to you sometime within the next week to discuss your research and the possibilities for me to conduct research under your supervision? So make sure that, that request is in there, that, request for supervision. Sometimes I read these letters from students and they don't actually explicitly say, I'd like you to be my supervisor. They just say, I'm interested in the program, I like your research, but they don't actually say, would you be interested in supervising me? So I've attached my CV along with my transcripts for your review in case you are interested. So don't be presumptuous in your email. That in case you're interested is very non-presumptuous. It leaves it open to the professor to whether to contact you or not. So those are some of the important elements of a letter. And well, there's another, if you go to the next slide, similar kind of letter has the same elements, reference to research, statement of what your own interest is, etc. Next slide, please, Liliana. Or Jared. I forget who's got control now. Well, here's a different kind of letter. This is if you're looking for a summer research opportunity. Summer research opportunities are great because at the undergraduate level, because they prepare you for graduate school in a way that your courses may not. So you can also make obviously really good connections with a faculty member at the university. So if you're staying within the university, a summer research opportunity could turn into, a supervision, a research supervision. So I'm completing my undergraduate studies in X, and I'm interested in gaining research experience. I read your paper on and was fascinated by your findings. Would I be able to work in your lab? Could we meet to discuss your research and blah, blah. So the same elements, statement of interest, reference to the potential supervisor's research, invitation to meet again, speak again. Okay, so who's doing other resources?
Liliana, I think that the first one is you, and then it's me.
Okay, sounds good. You can please click on the next slide. All right, so in terms of career services resources, we do have career specialists that can meet with you if you want to start planning your career, regardless of what year you're in. So if you're a first year student, just try and think about, should I even consider graduate school? You could definitely come in and see us. If you're about to graduate, you can come in and see us too. And just note that you are able to access our services within 1 year of graduation. So even if you just graduated from university, you still have a full year to access all of the resources. And some of those may include things like career planning and exploration. So if, let's say, you have some different career or graduate programs that you might be exploring, we could talk about pros and cons for those. We can try to create a plan with you, including CV, cover letter, and resume. If you wanted to also get some of your documents checked and just get some advice or feedback on them, you could definitely do that. Personal letters and interviews. And we also do interview preparation for some specific programs. So for example, if you're applying to med school, we do MMI interview prep. So that would be one of those that we could do. We do case consultation interviews. So we could help you in case that the graduate program does require an interview, we can help you prep for those. In addition, we have degree profiles on our website. So some of those give you ideas of how the different types of programs within the university align to different career paths. We don't have all of the graduate degree profiles, but it just gives you ideas depending on topics where you might want to pursue certain degrees. And then finally, we also have access to formal assessments. And so some of the assessments that you take, such as the strong interest inventory, It's psychometric assessment, and what it does is it takes a look at your interest, and then it provides you a variety of suggestions for careers that you could pursue. So if you wanted to pursue a professional type of degree or a career, it could give you some ideas as to if those are aligned to your interests. Therefore, they could be quite useful. We also have formal assessments on personality, values, strengths, and you could use all of those when you're trying to make that decision. If you want to connect with us, just go to elevate.ucalgary.ca and then you'll be able to book appointments there.
Hey, thanks, Liliana. And we're just switching back to me then. So just a couple more slides, I promise. We have taken a little longer than I think we intended. Oops, there we are. Just some other things to think about. We offer a lot of the similar services that Liliana just mentioned. I think that you're welcome to come to both to both of us, basically. What I normally say, and I'm not trying to suggest that there's a clear demarcation between us. I'll normally suggest that if you're really looking for a job, I'll recommend career services. If you're really looking for graduate school, I don't mean we're better at that, but you can come to us and we're definitely happy to provide help with that area. And normally if people come to us and they're specifically looking for a job, I'll normally suggest career services is the spot to go there, basically. But in any case, we do offer support for things like people who are interested in applying to graduate or professional school. We offer support with award and scholarship applications. I've worked with students, and Paul has done this too. We worked with students who are interested in medical school, law school, graduate schools of all sorts. I've helped students with research proposals for computer science, for comparative literature. I don't want to say every field, but we do work with students broadly there. There are some other things that you can find online in terms of different resources. So there is the Purdue Online Writing Lab. If you start doing searches for advice on personal statements and things like this, you can find things. I do want to recommend a few books and some other resources, and I'm actually going to share a couple things in the chat, and it'll just take me a second here to get this. But one of the things that I'm just sharing is a link to an interview with the author of the first book that I've included there. And then I'm also going to include a link to, it's actually an old blog post from the author of the second book mentioned there. These are both definitely resources that I would really recommend. I think that the first book mentioned here, Field Guide to Grad School, Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum, this is definitely one that I would say it's recent. It came out in 2020. It is something a little focused on the American market. So there was someone who'd asked the question before about resources for applying to American schools. This book is very US centered in terms of its advice. The author of it teaches at Indiana University. She has a PhD from an American university. So it's very American centered basically then. You can also have a look that hashtag hidden curriculum on Twitter. That's something that people do post with, and you can find lots of content. The other one that I'm recommending there is by Karen Kelsey, and she has a book and a website. The book is called The Professor is In, The Essential Guide to Turning Your PhD into a Job. If you are thinking about trying to pursue a career in academia in that area, that's something that I would recommend as something to look at. The book's a little bit older now, but a lot of the stuff is still I would say. Just a couple other things just to conclude then. We're just asking if you have questions. And sorry to say we have taught more than I think we intended, but we still have some questions in the session. And I think we've answered most of the questions that have come in, or probably maybe hopefully all of the questions that have come in so far. We've tried answering them in the chat or orally, but yes, we're happy to take further questions right now. And as someone did just ask to confirm that this is being recorded, so we'll be able to share this later. I see that Erin has a question, so please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. We're happy to take questions this way.
Thank you so much, first of all, for all this information. One question I had is that I use the Accessibility Center quite frequently. So I was wondering if are you able to do a reduced course load potentially in grad school and have certain academic accommodations Because for me specifically, I have ADHD, and I have certain supports put in place to help me with my education. Is that like a common thing in grad school?
It's a complicated answer. I think most of the answers that we've given today have started with it depends. What I would say is, yes, universities will provide accommodations to graduate students. They are legally required to, and they will do this. What I will say on the sort of more pragmatic side, some universities and some programs will be than others is what I would suggest. This is not quite the same thing, but when I was in graduate school, there was someone I was in graduate school with who having a family, having children was really important. And this person was eventually basically encouraged to leave the program because she continued to be, she had 3 children during graduate school, and they basically said, this isn't really a fit, right? And so there are things like that that do happen in graduate school. But again, universities will provide accommodations. I think that the catch is just figuring out how good will the program be? How good will the supervisor be? And I think a lot depends on what you want to do, what sort of program that you're looking for. Again, the universities will provide it, but I don't want to pretend that all universities will be equally accommodating, will be equally understanding. So that's what I'd say.
Right.
And I would just add that my sense, based on what I've heard and personal experience, is that the line between full-time and part-time is a little blurrier at the graduate level. So, at U of C, you've got to be taking 3 courses to be considered full-time, unless you have accommodations, in which case, 2 courses is enough to be considered full-time. But with graduate programs, I think the distinction is generally a little more fuzzy.
There may be a lot of different factors involved. Some graduate programs will actually have things that they might have a policy. My graduate school in the United States had a policy that was called the continuous enrollment policy, which meant that they wanted people to finish by a particular time. And that wasn't especially accommodating to people who may have different circumstances, including accommodations and reduced course load and things like this. So it really will depend on the program and the institution. I was noticing a few questions came in about things like, if people are interested in a course-based program, do we recommend beginning as soon as we complete undergrad or getting some working experience first? And I think the answer to that is it really depends on what you have in mind. If you're thinking about an MBA program, then I would recommend getting work experience first, and most programs will say that. If it's a Master of Engineering or something like this, it will depend. A lot of people go directly into those after undergrad, but some people will have working experience too. So that's something else that I would say there.
Can I add some? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I was going to add something too. Go ahead, Matthew.
Oh, sorry, Liliana here. Yeah, so yeah, no, it's okay. So what I was going to say in terms of that is, also think about, do you have any work experience? I have worked with some students that have never had any work experience. They go through undergrad, master's, PhD, and sometimes, let's say they want to go work for industry. It is challenging in those cases. If you have no work experience, they could consider you overqualified, but then you don't have that experience. And so it's a very strange way to get into an industry. So I would say, is there any way you could get part-time work while you are in grad school? Do you have any previous work experience before your undergrad? Or if not, highly recommended to have it if you are not planning to go, especially in academia or research, because companies do want you to have the skill set, but oftentimes they also want you to have that concrete skill set and professional experience to be able to get into it. And lastly, some graduate programs in their application requirements, they will suggest, highly recommend that you have a couple of years of experience prior to graduating. So just check the requirements for the school you're applying for.
Really depends
and I would just add one last thing here. I think if you're feeling very burnt out from your undergraduate degree, then it's not a good idea to push yourself into going to grad school right away. You need to be energized and enthusiastic, because it's not something you should take lightly. The other problem, though, at the other end of the spectrum is that if you take a couple of years off and you start making good money, it may be very difficult for you to contemplate graduate school again. You begin to get used to a certain lifestyle. You have expenses that you may not be able to pay as a graduate student. So, you know, you have to balance the two. Am I ready for graduate school? Do I need a little break? You know, how long a break can I afford to take, given that, you know, graduate school involves a certain amount of deprivation? Am I going to be able to accept that in a couple of years?
Just to follow up on that too and say, if it's a research-based program, typically depending on the program, but for most programs, they won't care if you have any work experience. They won't care if you have any extracurriculars at all. I went directly into a master's program after my undergraduate. I had basically no extracurriculars, very limited work experience. I went directly into a PhD after that. It depends basically, but if you're interested in the research side of things, what matters is your research, your writing, your GPA. Basically, that's what matters. I don't want to say nothing else, that nothing else will matter, but a lot of stuff doesn't matter much compared to this. Just following up on a couple other questions. So there have been a couple of questions that have come in about GPA and about other types of things. GPA is a tricky one. Some schools will have a little bit of a sliding scale for things. If you have a high GPA, if there's a requirement for some programs where you might have to take an exam of some sort, the GRE, for some specific programs, you may have a specific exam that you want to take, and they do care about that. But again, it will depend on things. If you're trying to upgrade your GPA, I recommend contacting places, see what they have to say. Basically, you get all the information that they have on their website and contact people and figure out, is this going to be a possibility, basically.
Yeah. And don't forget that GPA is only one factor. There are a lot of students with very high GPAs applying to some of these competitive programs, and so the distinction will sometimes rest on performance during the interview, or this, you know, the letter of intent or personal statement. So don't get too hung up on GPA. There are other factors.
I also wanted to add, sometimes GPA, it's calculated by the last 20 courses. Sometimes it's calculated cumulative, so everything you've taken. So you really have to be mindful when you're looking at the GPA requirement, what exactly are they calculating? Is it only core courses, last 20 courses? Because that's going to make a big impact in terms of how you calculate it.
Yeah, I mean, for instance, the Cummings School of Medicine will look at all 4 years, but they won't factor in your spring and summer courses.
There was a question in the chat asking about how to follow up for one-on-one appointments. And I guess what I would say, so there are a few different options. Again, there are Liliana and colleagues at Career Services. There's Paul and I and our colleagues at the Student Success Center. And yes, I'm seeing that Liliana / Matthew has just shared in the chat. So that's the website to book an appointment. So elevate.ucalgary.ca. And so if you go there and you can select Student Success Center. If you'd like to book with me, Paul, or one of our colleagues, you can select academic support. And we have a type of appointment that's called graduate school, or it's called award and application support, or something to that. And that will bring up the available appointments. You can also email us directly. So I think I've included my email address in the chat already. And Paul, I imagine you can drop yours, and I don't remember your email address. Liliana, I suspect you can share yours too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Paul, you have the old style UCalgary email address. Like, it can't be more than 7 characters, basically. Yes, and I have one that's 25 characters, unfortunately.
In terms of the GPA, I also wanted to note, sometimes they list the minimum requirement, but depending on how competitive the program is, you might notice it's actually 4 points more or so. Like, it might say minimum requirement 3.2, but if you actually check with the department, they might say, yeah, last time most people had a 3.6, 3.7. So that's why it's a good idea to connect and talk directly with some departments or people from the institutions to get that information. Are there any other questions? Yes, so the recording, maybe what we're going to do is I'm going to send a copy of the slides to everyone registered through Elevate. And also, if you're planning to attend the career fair or the graduate school fair, sorry, on Thursday next week, you are able to access it when you log into the platform. We are going to have the recording posted there as well. So yes, you'll be able to access that.
And I just comment, if you do have really specific questions, if you're thinking about a particular program in a particular place, honestly, we will likely not know about the program, but if you share the website with us, share the links with us, we're happy to work through and think about requirements. We're happy to think about different sorts of things that will go into a graduate school application. And I will say the book that I shared before in the chat, or the link that I shared, and the book title in the slides earlier, so the whatever it was called, the book about graduate school, the hidden curriculum one, that is a good resource if you're just trying to navigate thinking about like what stuff matters if I want to go to graduate school. It is a good resource for that, and it is something that will kind of level the playing field a little bit for people. Some people have advantages because their parents have gone to graduate school. So if you're in a position where you're saying, I'm going to be the first in my family to go to graduate school, that type of thing, or thinking about it, that book can be a good resource. Talking to some of us can also be a good resource just to think about, like, here are some of the things to be keeping in mind.
And I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that, you know, the Academy has changed a little bit over the last couple of decades. And you know, if you are considering, you know, teaching at a university, you should know that it's a lot more competitive these days than it used to be. There are a lot fewer positions for PhDs. So, you know, two things. Number one, if you want to be a really good candidate, start doing, you know, research as soon as possible. Get published while you're still doing your graduate degree. Publication is extremely important. And two, you know, have a kind of backup plan. Consider what other kinds of careers you could have with a PhD, or if you decide that a PhD isn't necessary to do those things, you might want to consider just making the master's your terminal degree. Because I mean, generally a PhD is usually leads to teaching, though not always. So it is something to consider seriously.
I don't know if I can echo that more, but just to say, yes, the reality of trying to get teaching positions at university, it's increasingly unlikely for people to be able to do that. It's common in some fields to apply for a job and you'll be one of 200 applicants for it. That's not a joke at all in terms of how many people will be applying for things. So do keep that in mind if you are thinking about that academic career pathway. There's a lot that goes into it. It's extremely competitive, and sometimes it means a lot of uncertainty about your future, where you're going to be living, if you're going to be moving across the country, across the continent, across, you know, across the globe, potentially even just to try to find another job for the next year. So that is the reality if you're thinking about a career pathway that involves teaching. It is complicated, and honestly, for many students, I would recommend, not that I don't think you can do it, but whether or not you think that it's worth the time and the effort for it, because it does get complicated very quickly. We are nearing the end of our time. And again, we took longer than I think we intended to talk. We have included our emails in the chat, so please feel free to follow up with us if you have further questions. We're happy to meet with students one-on-one to talk more about things like graduate applications. I suspect we all have helped students in the past, maybe even draft emails to a potential supervisor, things like this. So if you're looking for some additional guidance, definitely do keep us in mind. We're happy to help as much as we can. This recording will be available to you, and also the slides, which I have shared in the chat once already as a PDF. Those will also be shared with you by email too, so you can access that. Paul and Liliana, do you have last words before we finish up?
No, I would say really explore your possibilities, and before you apply, make a decision, make sure that it is the right fit for you. don't jump into just doing it. I would say really consider your options there.
Yeah, because it's a huge investment in time and energy and money, and you want to be sure that you are committed to that path.